What's up, Internet, and welcome back to the podcast. Today I am joined again with my friend Isaac, except now he's in a different state. And
hmm
we're just gonna chit chat a little bit. The first episode I did with you, we talked a little
hmm
bit about your gifting, but we didn't really get into any of the nitty gritty
hmm
or how it works or what you've seen or anything like that. And I feel like with this podcast it would be really cool to like, one of the things that I'm doing is trying to create a paradigm that is bigger than what the typical church paradigm is, because that's in reality that's what the heavens, that's what God's creation actually is it's a greater paradigm than what we often focus on. And it's funny, I've been learning, even theologically speaking, about different things through the Bema podcast, or like Marty Solomon, his book, Asking Better Questions of the Bible, and learning about just theological concepts that just blow my mind. And I remember asking my mentor and friend JT, I was like, dude, why don't we even learn about things like the chiasms and stuff? And he goes, well, that's usually for the theologians or the biblical nerds. He was like, honestly, when it comes to most Sundays, people just need to like sort of stop the proverbial bleeding. He's like, so that's why church usually focuses on the same thing over and over again. And I get that. I think we could do a better job of expanding that paradigm in the church, but I do get it. But that said, I love breaking down this like theological big vastness. And also for me, I think you and I talked about this last time.
hmm
It's really dope to get this greater paradigm, even with the Deuteronomy 32 worldview stuff that we talked about. It's like it makes everything feel bigger and more epic, and like, oh wow, God really is way bigger than even I used to think he was. And I used to think he was massive, but now I'm like, oh, it's
Yeah.
so much grander than even that. And so stories like this, like what you're going to tell today probably, and what we're going to touch on, I think just does more of that. It really, for me, provokes me, and I hope it provokes other people into more awe of how big the Lord is and how crazy his creation actually is. And one thing that even the blurry creatures guys talk about all the time is that you know if this earth has so many different species of things, why wouldn't we expect the heavens to be just as vast and beautiful, if not more so? And so welcome back to the podcast, man.
Hi.
Thanks
I'm
for
glad to be back.
thanks for joining me. How's life up in the northern area? You're in Washington, right? But just on the south
Yes.
end?
Just across the river from Oregon. I'm in Vancouver, Washington. It's a totally different place from Reading, where I was with you guys and
Yep.
still deeply miss. Um, Reading is sort of a place where the veil is thin and the atmosphere is charged.
Yep.
There's a lot of activity out there, a lot of angelic activity, a lot of God activity. Some of that's, Bethel and the surrounding churches and just
Yeah.
a huge center of that there.
I learned
And then there's
recently there's
also,
so many churches in this area. Like
yep,
so many. I was like, that seems insane for how small Reading is.
yeah, only like 100,000 people or something,
Yeah.
but they get a lot of traffic and a lot of people coming through. And so there really is quite a lot of activity there and a lot of warfare too. There's
Yeah.
a lot of witchcraft and Freemasonry, and all that.
And then
Um,
Shasta being a
yeah,
haven for New Agers.
yes. And there's this place, Vancouver, Washington, is sort of the 180 of that
Hmm.
because to me, it feels like the veil is thicker here. And then the local principalities and powers are sort of what what I sensed, what I saw when I first came here was it was sort of this um you know if you have glasses and you look at them like from the side, sometimes like the lens will look like thick and there'll be some buildup, along
Yep.
the side because that's the part that doesn't get clean. It was sort of like there was a grimy, sort of smothering lens or distortion hanging over and pressing down on
Hmm.
Vancouver. And it is. it's kind of wild because um, it's like I said, it's right across the river from Portland, from
Yep.
Oregon, you know. And Portland is a weird, weird town with a lot of spiritual stuff going on and a lot
Hmm.
of everything under the sun, basically. And so Vancouver is this sort of like dampened, smothered, sort of like it's mostly suburbs. It's a totally different thing. And that just goes to show you like, you know, 500 feet, 1,000 feet of bridge can be a lot in the spirit as far as like domains and territories, you know.
Hmm.
And I felt
Yep.
it leaving Reading. I felt
Yep.
a great deal of melancholy and wistfulness and sadness and all that. But I also felt a lot of sort of it was like I was hugged and embraced by the angels there as I left
Hmm.
through Shasta, through the sort of like a northern county, because I think it goes Shasta County and then Shasta Mountain, which is not actually in Shasta County, it's Siskiyou County.
Yep.
And then you gradually get to Oregon from there. But
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Well,
felt,
Heiser talks about cosmic geography because the whole thing of when the Lord disinherited the nations
yeah,
and
split them up.
handed them over to the Elohim. It created a hierarchy, and actually, and I don't know what to think about the book of Jubilees and Jasher. I don't know. I would like to talk to somebody that has really researched that stuff.
Yeah.
But I have a feeling it's pretty similar to Enoch, where it gives people like
Some of the context.
it gave context to what the second
Yeah.
temple Jews believed, but it may not necessarily be, something you can really stick a stake in the ground with. But it talks
Mhm.
about when Noah was telling his sons where to go and where they were dictating things.
Yeah.
It talks about them drawing what's that called? What would they do? It was drawing straws or something. Not
Drawing lots.
That's the one.
Yeah.
Where they would draw lots on where they would go and where each son or grandson would stake claim. And so it's as if there was almost like this ordained plot of land for each son and
Yeah.
grandson and everything like that. And I wondered, I know that's it's probably similar in the heavens. I mean, even Plato was talking about, I think he quoted Moses in saying something about the different nations having different gods and stuff, or
Yeah.
little g gods, and talked about why Greece had the ones that they had because of quote unquote wisdom and la da da, etc.
Yeah.
I don't remember the quote exactly, but um, all that to say, cosmic geography is an interesting uh, kind of
Yeah.
paradigm that talks about how these different places have different principalities and different angelic movements and different
Mhm.
spiritual atmospheres and stuff. It's really fascinating.
Yeah. And I definitely ran afoul of that on my way up. I could feel sort of as I was driving up Oregon and into and through the Willamette Valley and eventually across the bridge to Vancouver, I could feel the shift in the atmosphere every time I entered a different sort of like realm or place like claimed by some sort of like power, you know? And
Yep.
it's not like I didn't stop and like investigate each time, you know, but
Right.
I had to pray through a few things. A few different places felt like this sort of smothering mist of darkness were trying to like get on me, and I just sort of I prayed that back. I
Yeah.
prayed for the land as I went, you know, and I think that's something as a side note that we should probably do more of. Like we should pray for the
Yes.
land
Yeah.
itself because that there is something like spiritually alive about the
Yep.
land itself, right?
Yep.
Not to be Wiccan or New Agey or
No,
any of
it's true.
that,
It's
but
true. Dr. Laura Sanger, the Roots of the Federal Reserve lady, she talks a ton about the like spiritual mapping is one of the things that she calls what she does.
yeah,
And they will go somewhere, they will do research about the land and the history and stuff, and they will find where iniquity was done in the land, even whether it be recently or even as far back as when the Native Americans were around or in other parts of the world,
yeah,
like like millennia ago, and they will pray against that because there is a truth to. I mean, we know that spiritual bloodlines, somebody could have a lineage of curses and somebody breaks that generational curse, right? It's the same with the land. And like she even when talking about the roots of the Federal Reserve, she's talking about how even the place where they met, Jekyll Island, or Jekyll, I guess, Jekyll Island, where they met to basically talk about creating the Federal Reserve, there was tons of iniquity from back when the giants and the natives and all this stuff, they did their paganistic rituals
Yeah.
and blood sacrifices and stuff like that, and even as much as like the slave trade
Hmm.
was happening even after it was illegal for a long time in that area. So it's a very real paradigm, and the more I listen to different like priests and different people that have worked in deliverance ministries and stuff, the more I realize that like this stuff actually matters and
Absolutely.
it's really important. So
Yeah. I mean, I think I've heard, I mean, I haven't been down there to corroborate it for myself, but I've heard that's the reason why the water in Mexico is, in large parts of Mexico, is so undrinkable because for centuries there was like, the Maya and the Incas, blood sacrifices to different gods,
and that's one way that it manifests in the physical. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, like Oregon, I've realized that the state I come from, Oregon, is a really, really heavy place, like spiritually. I found out recently that Willamette Valley, the valley I was lived in and was born in, um, it means something like in the tongue of the Native Americans, something like valley of heaviness or valley of sickness,
Yeah.
And there's something true about that. I mean, it's a beautiful place, but the enemy tends to go after beauty in a really serious, really
Hmm.
heinous, really like insidious way,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
And you think like there was, on the Oregon Trail, there were so many deaths, right? People headed out. When they got here, there was all sorts of like deprivations and assaults and evils done to like the native
Oh yeah.
people, right?
Well,
And
that
then
and even to the people that came out here, they were mistreated like crazy.
yeah, like and the Whitman massacre, I think that was something like there was
Mhm.
some missionaries, I think, that set up a town or a home, and tried to mitigate tensions and
Wow.
navigate different relationships, and they were massacred eventually for it, and
Yep.
I'm not
I'm
blaming
reminded.
anyone.
Yeah, but it
It
creates a spiritual paradigm like
yeah, that's what I'm saying.
iniquity poisons the land effectively. Last thing I'll say on it, unless we want to sit on this topic for a minute, but Indiana. So JT, I just talked about him.
Yeah.
When he was there, he did a bunch of research and he realized that one of the reasons why it is quote unquote nap town and it's spiritually
Mm,
sleepy
yeah.
is actually because there was a point in time where the spirit moved heavily.
Yeah.
And there was one church in particular. I think it was the first church that ever had one of their sermons broadcasted. It was either on radio or black and white TV. I don't remember which, but it was like, it was a big deal. And they were a big church.
Yeah.
Years later, that church, for whatever reason, decides to move down to Texas. And if I remember correctly, it became the church that the saying "don't drink the Kool-Aid" came from, where it became a cult and a bunch of
Yeah.
people got killed over it. And so there was this paradigm in Indiana where everybody all of a sudden was like, oh, we can't trust that stuff. Let's push it
Yeah.
off. And now they're very spiritually sleepy because they don't
Yeah.
trust moves of the spirit anymore in a real way. And there's a
That's
stronghold
heinous.
there because of
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, and that's when it gets in at that level, that widespread and that deep, that becomes a real problem, right? And not something that I think any one given person can deal with, right? You
Yeah.
end up needing a whole community to deal with it because it was a whole community that caused that, right?
Mhm.
And so,
Dude, that's like Sorry, I'm just man, my brain is going so many with with JT. He is his ministry is civil righteousness, and I'm
Yeah.
excited. I get to I'll get to interview him, and I think June is when we planned it. But I was
Mhm.
going to talk to him about this, but it fits because he's an African American man, and
Yeah.
he is all about civil righteousness. You know, it's a play
Yeah.
on the civil rights stuff, but it's more God driven, biblical driven, and
Yeah.
regardless, I never did used to grasp why it mattered that people today should repent for things in the past until I learned about
Hmm.
generational curses
Three
in
or
the
four
bloodline.
generations. Yep.
Yeah. And I was like, oh, if this is so potent just in a single bloodline, like your father or your mother into your life and it affecting you in a big way,
Hmm.
if it's that potent that way, and then this stuff that I learned from Laura Sanger and others,
Hmm.
if all that is really like creating iniquity in the land that's truly affecting things and
Yeah.
then actually yeah it does make sense that even though I've never owned a slave I should pray against what was
Yeah.
and I don't know, and I'm not saying that like I'm not the guy that's going like yeah reparations like that I'm not going that far that way, but there is a spiritual paradigm that we need to lean into with it is all I'm saying, right?
Yeah. Well, it's just I think just a reality, often a subtle reality that we miss that what we do echoes into eternity.
Yeah,
I think I just quoted the Gladiator movie because I think that was a quote from the Gladiator
I
movie.
think it is.
But
But it's true.
but it's true. And I'm just saying, um, right, like how does it go? It's always like three or four generations in the Bible, right? To the third
Yes.
or fourth generation. And that goes for blessing, that goes for curses, that goes for
Well,
strongholds, that
blessings like
goes
for a
for
thousand
trauma.
generations.
Well, yeah, there you
Yeah.
go. And that says something about the power of our God over the enemy, you know?
Amen.
But that's something, I'm dealing with because I moved up here to reconnect and meet with my father. Meet him in person for the first time in like 17 years. We reconnected in October, and so like I think that's opened up some bridges and some pathways and some channels, so to speak. Um, Maybe more in him. I'm not so sure how it's affected me totally,
Yeah.
but that's brought some things online that um, I've been grappling with and working with and struggling through, muddling through.
Yeah.
Um, and I've realized like I need to pray through some of this stuff through the
Yep.
bloodline of my father, right? Because there's a lot going on there. I've been working through praying through some of the bloodline stuff through my father's side, and I'm not super aware of like that history. I've been talking with my dad about it, and it sounds like there's a lot of issues there and a lot going on. And I just know that when you when you go to different places, you kind of come under the covering and the atmosphere of that place. And that
Yes.
goes for like literal geographic locations. And that's what, I felt as I left Reading and moved here, traveled through the valley, all that, feeling in sharp new clarity, all the different powers and darkness and heaviness in the land that I used to live in, where it was just normal. I forgot about it. Like you can become used to anything,
Oh,
basically.
absolutely.
But there's something too about like the relationships in the community, right? Coming under the covering of that. And that goes for like church community, which is why you should have a good church community and make sure that the pastor, the leaders, the whoever's in charge of the place and taking care of people are people that you can come under the authority of, right?
Hmm. Yep.
And it's also why like our closest relationships, our friends and our family, why that really matters. And that does echo, and to refer to your friend JT, that does echo up and down a family line.
Yep.
So civil rights movement was only in like the 60s, right? So the whole African American community is still definitely feeling the effects of that.
Yep.
And so there's
Yep.
definitely things that need to be broken off and worked through for
Absolutely.
them to come into the fullness of freedom,
Yeah. Yep.
right? Because they were slaves for like, I don't know, hundreds of years, right?
Yep. Yep.
Generations there. That doesn't
Yep.
go away overnight, And so
Mm-hmm.
I have a great deal of like
Empathy.
compassion for any empathy and compassion for anyone who's working through that,
Yeah.
because I know how it goes, right? Like I said, in my father's bloodline, there's a lot of unhealth and a lot of like bitterness and distrust and strife and
Yep.
rage and all sorts of things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Dude, even one of my
Mhm.
things, anger, I know that a lot of it comes from my mother's bloodline. Like her dad
Yeah,
he was an angry dude for a lot of his
yeah,
life. Um, wasn't till, after I had been alive for a little while that he started to calm down. But
yeah,
man, he used to be an angry guy, and that whole side of the family, like his brother, um, as far as I can tell, his other son, though I don't know for sure because I've rarely spent any time around him, but like I know that his brother was freaking aggressively angry, and so that's like a spiritual thing that in my family line I have to continually, like, not all continually fight. I had to fight against for a long time, and still sometimes it tries to creep up on me, but
yeah.
yeah, dude, it's true.
We're all inheritors of the people that came before us,
Exactly.
right? As much as we want to be rugged individuals here in the US.
Yeah,
Um, it's an odd thing the way that God's hand can be on a family through generations and lines and lineages. And it's an odd thing, a mysterious thing, and I think a very good thing, a wondrous thing, the way that He directs those lines and lineages and
yeah,
um, can redeem them. A lot can be passed down that's good too, right? Because
absolutely.
and a lot can be redeemed from the broken places because the enemy always goes for the place of blessing first and hardest,
Yeah. Yep.
the place where we're supposed to be blessed and supposed to be anointed, right? So anger, like, you have to get to the root of what is the enemy attacking there, you know,
Hmm.
and that goes for anything that the enemy's attacking,
Well, I've heard this many times, but most people that see in the spirit, the enemy comes to him early on in life because he knows that, hey, this is a gift that this person has, and then they end up seeing a bunch of demonic things before they ever see angelic. Is
Yeah,
that something that was true for you?
absolutely. I mean, it was true for me and it was true for like um my immediate family, like my brothers and sisters and all that. I'm the only one that believes, and I've believed for all my life, right?
Yeah.
I had a Holy Spirit sense, really, really, really young, like 1 and 2. I had from a very early age. Actually, my granny told me this story. She said that at one point I had either called out or walked up to my dad, and been like, "Okay, I'm here. What's up?" And he's like, "I didn't call you." And that it was this whole sort of Samuel thing again, right? Like, I'm like, he recognized it. Took him a minute or two, but he recognized it, and so he said, like, "Okay, if you hear that again, that voice again, you know, tell God you're listening. Say I'm listening. Ask him what he's saying.
Yep.
And apparently I did, and came back later to my dad, and like I was like 2 or 3 at this time, like held his nose and said fast, and apparently I hadn't known that word before, so they
Hmm.
knew it was a God thing, and so my dad started a fast on it. It I've been really fortunate in that way, in that this is one of the things I think I actually inherited from my dad, is
Hmm.
that while he had a lot of issues with his own father, adoptive and biological, because he was adopted too, and while he had issues and some struggles there, he always had a sense that God loved him, that
Yeah.
Abba, the Father, loved him. And so he always had that sense of chosenness. And that passed, I think, to me, right, as
Hmm.
the firstborn. And there's something about that blessing, I think.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
I mean, for myself and for my siblings too, several of them that I know if they pursue God, they would be, I think, gifted with seeing in the spirit. I think they would be sensitive that way and open that way. We all saw a lot of darkness very young. One of my sisters had um, reoccurring nightmares of like, dark and shadowy figures
Hmm.
standing over her at night, for large parts of her childhood, Um, several different times, into my teens, I had really obviously demonic dreams waking me up at like 3 in the morning. It's always 3 in the morning, always the witching hour. Several different times, I had to go into different sisters' rooms and pray against the malevolence there. I remember walking into one of my sister's rooms. She actually saw some sort of light, some sort of darkness, and the smell of, I think, brimstone or sulfur or
Hmm.
something gross and gnarly and dark, and freaked out and texted my mom. And my mom, who hadn't even been like part of the church in several years at that point, like messaged me to go in there, unsettled herself. And I remember stepping into that room, and there was like a palpable sense of menace, of malevolence, like that kind of heaviness in the air where you know it's not just like the heaviness in the air of like the place I grew up or Vancouver. It was
Hmm.
like something dark is actively here and
Oh yeah.
actively like malevolent and actively amused at the fear and the suffering,
Hmm.
that it had caused. Right. There was a heat to the room, an unnatural heat to the room, and a sort of like palpable tension. It's the hardest feeling to like put into words. When you've experienced it once or twice, you get it. And I remember like sitting there, like I didn't know jack, about at that point about like much of anything. I'm not necessarily the theological teacher guy, and I didn't have very much in the way of church at that time. But I remember just praying against this thing because that's what I do, right? That's my gift and my call, and I think that was itself was inherited from my grandmother on my mom's side. And yeah, we really did see a lot of the dark before we saw the light. And I'm not even sure my siblings, because they're not seeking God, I've seen much of the light. But
Hmm.
for myself, and especially in the last few years, the dark gave way more and more to the light. And so I see a lot more of the angelic now than I did before,
Yeah.
especially
Okay.
in the last 2 years.
Yeah. So I get a sense when there's something
Mm-hmm.
palpably demonic around.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Usually I think like I'm not so sensitive to it that I notice it all the time, but I definitely notice it when it's thick,
Yeah,
I guess. And so for me, it's a lot of times just a knowing, but for you, like in that instance, it was a knowing. But what's it like other times? Because there's multiple types of, I guess, quote unquote, seeing in the spirit.
yeah.
And so do you want to talk a little bit about that? Like what kind of different things, like how you see different things? Like, is it sometimes in the room? Is it sometimes through like a vision? Is it, how are the different ways that you see stuff?
There's a lot of different ways, I guess. There are a lot of different ways to see in the spirit, right? Some people see things literally with their eyes. And I've seen a few things that way. For
Hmm.
me, it's a lot more in my in my spirit, or as a sort of like overlay that bleeds into the world, right? Like something so tangible that like I don't just know it's there, I experience that it's there.
Hmm.
Um yeah, like there are dreams. You can have dreams. That's the really like that's talked about all the time in the Bible, right?
Yep.
There are like visions which can come in several different forms. Um for me, a lot of really precious encounters I've had have kind of come in that place between waking and sleeping, right?
Hmm.
As you're falling asleep or sort of dozing or napping or in between. those states, right?
Yep.
There's something about the liminal space, about the place of transition. And that goes for like seasons of our life too, right?
Hmm.
Places of or seasons of transition can be places where you encounter God a lot or places where you encounter God very, very little because he's quiet. And that's me right now. I don't know. How do you want me to break this down, right?
I guess I'm just trying to give
Mm-hmm.
people a paradigm of like the different ways in which you
Yeah.
see it. Now, if you want to just tell some different stories of things that you have seen and how you saw them or how you knew of them or whatever, that's fine too. I guess I'm just trying to create a paradigm of like the way that
Yeah.
because I know that like what you were just saying, like when it comes to the waking time, that's usually when people get sleep paralysis.
Yeah.
That's when I used to get it.
Yeah.
Or actually, sometimes I would think I was awake and having sleep paralysis, and I would see where I was sleeping, and I
Yeah.
would know there was a presence there, and I couldn't move, and I couldn't speak until finally I could finally say Jesus, and then I'd wake up and I'd realize, oh, I was still in a dream technically. But then other
Yeah.
times I would be fully awake and my eyes open and whatnot, and then I'm
Yeah.
frozen until finally I can say Jesus and then I can finally move. So it's weird because sometimes I'll still be asleep, but seeing where I'm at, but then other times I'm fully awake. It's super weird.
Yeah.
Uh, but
And
yeah, so there's that,
yes.
and then there's other people like Micah Turnbro
Yeah, Micah.
who basically sees
Love
an
Micah.
overlay all the time.
He's
Uh,
awesome. Well, he sees things like, okay, so how do I put it? He sees things like all sorts of different ways. That guy is wildly gifted, and he sees a lot of things physically with his physical eyes. You
yes.
know, because you can see things. Uh, you have a body, you have a soul, you have a spirit. They're all interwoven, so that separating them out, into boxes is a little bit futile or impossible.
Yes.
So you can see things um, with your physical eyes. I've had that a few different times. You can see things sort of um, through your soul, right? The lens of your mind and imagination, right?
Hmm. If I do
And
ever see something, that's usually how it is while I'm
yeah,
praying with my eyes closed. But
yeah,
it's not like a thing. It's usually more like a prophetic, like, hey,
yeah.
I see this about this person. And they're like, how would you know that?
And that's I think the breath of the spirit, right? Because the spirit animates all of this. Our soul and even our body are like the stained glass that the light of the spirit shines through, you
Mhm.
know? And so there are just a lot of different ways to experience the prophetic. Whether that's even within the prophetic, you can break it down to some people have the prophetic gifting, right?
Yes.
And there are a variety of different gifts, right? That all verge, into the spirit in different ways. Um, and even within those gifts, there's a lot of different expressions of those gifts.
Yes.
Then there are people that don't necessarily have the gift, but because we have the spirit inside of us, and if they're attentive, to God, right, they can still see and experience things,
Yes.
right? So that's the, you know, common to just believers, right?
Yep.
And then there are people that are particularly gifted in a certain way and get a lot of different things, right? Mike is an example of that. And I think there's a takeaway there just looking at Micah, right? In that his ministry is all about making friends with Jesus, making friends
Yes.
for Jesus. And so, really, the root of any sort of scene or any sort of prophetic experience or encounters, has to be God. It
Yeah.
has to be Jesus, or you end up going to some pretty iffy places. The world does that, right? There are a lot of different methods and access ways into the realm of the spirit.
Hmm. Illegal
And
ways. Yep.
yeah, and the spirit world is old. It's older than this earth. It's older than us.
Yes.
So it's a dangerous place, right? And then we have the cosmic war going on, right? Anyway, so just to sort of like, thread the needle on sort of like different ways, like I've seen, things. I've seen things with my physical eyes. Some of that was sometimes I'll be in heavy prayer and see like distortions in the air and feel the heat and the presence,
Okay.
on me. Some of those times have been when portals have opened in prayer, right?
Hmm.
And angels have come through, or the grace or the light of God has come through. I've seen things sort of in my mind's eye, right? Like internally, not
Hmm.
third eye. That's not what I mean. That's a different thing. Not that. But
Right.
internally, right? I've seen things like in a way, like just prophetically knowing, right? And I can see that picture and I can hear what the spirit's telling me and get that, you know. And then there's sort of like a little bit in between where it's like the overlay, where like it's sort of internal, but it also sort of bleeds into where you are in the moment, you know,
Hmm.
right? And there are a variety of different ways to see, variety of different revisions, variety of different types of dreams. We're supposed to come to God with everything,
Hmm.
which means that when we pray, you know, doing the listening prayer, the soaking prayer, um, or just casually talking to God, right? We can and should experience God through our senses,
Yes.
right? Because He created our senses, He created our five senses, made us in such a way to enjoy and use our senses and to take them to God. So,
Yeah, I remember in the first episode I had with Joe, she even talked about smelling roses one time when there were no
yeah,
roses around.
yeah, that's a good example of that, right? And so, like, sometimes, like, I'll realize sounds or sense like smell, you know, um, or feelings I'm feeling, you know, are coming from the spirit
Yeah,
and not coming from like physically what's around me.
yeah.
And there's some sort of like I typically like live with a number of angels around me, you know. And one of the hard things of this season is that I don't know if it's like a seasonal thing with God or if it's just the place I'm in and the covering I'm under, you know.
Yeah.
But those have been very quiet and muted. And my angel crew sort of has disappeared on me, right? And it's not literally that they're gone, right? I have a sense of where they are and what they've been up to and all that. But
Yeah.
I'm used to that. And so like I've had interactions and moments where like I think I mentioned it to you before, like an angel will like tug my beard, you know, and
Hmm.
I'll get that sense, right, in my spirit that that's what she's doing. And then like feel the phantom sensation of it, right?
Hmm.
Or I got slapped by an angel once. Actually, that same angel. I got slapped because I said I was like I was depressed that day. I was doing the Elijah woe is me thing. I was like peace has forsaken me. And then she slapped me because she's an angel of peace. And she said, never say that. And so um clearly I think she needs to go back for remedial training because that wasn't very peaceful. But
Hey,
that
sometimes you have to hit something to create a little peace in it, man.
yeah,
Hey,
that's
peacemaking requires
yeah.
a little bit of physicality sometimes.
There's some truth to that in terms of like we all know the Hebrew word shalom is the word for peace, right? And it
Yeah.
means a lot of different things. It's the peace that makes things complete, that brings chaos, like order out of chaos, right?
Yep. And in order to
Nothing good
fix a
with hell.
broken bone, sometimes you have to break the bone to fix it.
Well, that goes to the root of the Hebrew word for peace is the Hebrew words. The root of the Hebrew word shalom is shalom, which means to make covenant,
Hmm.
right? And so,
Which requires a sacrifice, or it did.
yeah, and apparently slapping people sometimes. But don't quote me on that. I don't want you to like go up and slap your pastor and say like, yeah, this guy on the internet told me to do it. No. But anyway, what I'm saying is like,
Sometimes you literally
yeah.
feel it. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I get it. I get it. Well, and another thing to sort of lend credence to this, I guess, that it's not just imaginatory or whatever. You had zero reason to know that I had a Thor tattoo because when you and I met, like,
Mm,
I mean, it's under my arm. Like, you'd have to, like, I would
mm,
have to do something very intentionally. So like within the first couple times that you and I met in person,
mm.
You told me about an encounter that you had with apparently one of the angels that's around
Your
me,
guardian angel, yeah.
and how he was pissed that I had a Thor tattoo because I got it before I learned that Thor.
Pissed is a strong word. He wasn't happy with it.
Touche, but the fact that I didn't know when I got it that Thor was a basically a representation of Lucifer because Thor, Baal, Zeus, all of them are the same. I didn't know that
What?
at the time. But
I'm just saying,
anyways,
what did you think you were putting on your body?
I was like, Marvel Thor is dope, dude. Like I feel like I
Yeah,
relate to that character and the way that he thinks and feels, and he's
yeah, I
anyway.
get you. Okay, look, I get you, and I'm not against tattoos, right?
No, no,
It depends on like what you put on your body, and I don't think it's like some huge issue, but
no.
it was kind of funny that like Krakos, I think I don't know how to pronounce
That's
that,
what you
but
told me it was.
Krakos, yeah, was like not happy with that. I asked him actually, like, because he is sort of like he was a storm angel. There are a lot of different types of angels.
Yeah,
He
that's
was an
something we
angel of
should
the
talk about
storm.
too.
Yeah, let's get into that. But he was a storm angel, and I'm like, because of the Thor thing, I'm like, do you like hammers? And he was like, very, very much no. You know, I think he said
It's
something
funny.
about axes or spears,
Yeah, I remember you
liking
saying something
those,
about an
but
axe, but yeah, no, like, to give credence to it is you had no reason to know why, unless for some reason you scrolled back years ago on my Instagram, the one time I freaking posted it, you know what I mean?
yeah,
And you don't strike me as the type to care that much,
no.
so, um, yeah, so that would have been the only reason that you would have known that I had it, and then you're just like, yeah, I don't know if you have a Thor tattoo or not, but this is what I felt like your angel
I
said
don't.
to me, and I was
I
like,
mean,
okay.
Joe might have mentioned it at some point or another, but like, oh, whatever.
Yeah, I guess that could be too. But either way, I'm trying to lend credence here to the fact that it's not just an
Mhm.
imaginatory thing. And anybody that has talked
Well,
to a new ager or somebody that's done psychedelics, they'll tell you that, like, oh,
yeah,
they have encounters with the new age as well. And that we can get into this after, like, you maybe you can talk to us about different types of angels and beings that you've seen.
yeah,
But something we should get into a little bit later is the fact that we're entering the age of post-atheism because of all the experiences that
yeah.
new agers and stuff are having through things like psychedelics and occult rituals and stuff like that. But we'll get to that after. What kinds of what kinds of angels and even like
Uh,
maybe
a
demonic
variety,
things have you
a
seen?
variety, both on both. Um, oh, I haven't had much in the way of encounters very recently, but I remember I've had a lot in Reading. Where do you want to start?
Ah, dude, anything. I mean, you just talked about the different angels around you. What and
Yeah,
you named out a storm type of angel. So
yeah.
let's talk about that. Like what kinds
Okay,
of different angels have you?
yeah. So storm angels, I've that's the interesting thing, right? Is that God is so creative, a lot more than I think we realize, because maybe that's a Western thing, maybe that's a universal thing, maybe that's whatever. But God created like all the nuance and the beauty around you. And we really, most of us don't have eyes for it
Yeah.
and we miss it, right? And ironically, like I think sometimes the scientists, the new agers, the world, whatever, grasp that a lot better than we do, right? Because look at the intricacy, like all around you, and tell me, like, God's not creative.
Oh yeah. We don't even know all of the different types of creatures that are in the sea or in the forests.
That's, don't get me started on the sea. That's a different thing. But he's so creative. And so that doesn't just extend to the natural things he made. That extends like to the angels he made. That extends to people. That extends to the gifts he gives, in the spirit. Like I was saying, there are a lot of different expressions of all the different gifts of the spirit, right?
And again, just
Um,
to clarify, as we said last time, angel just
yeah,
means messenger. It's not
yeah.
a
It's not a species name. It's a job title. It's not, it means messenger. And humans have been messengers too. And angel is used, I think, in that context as messenger is used of people in the Bible too.
yes.
Always like, God's so creative, like when he made all the angels, because they have a great deal of personality, right? I'm
Mhm.
surrounded by more than a few, a great deal of the time. And I've seen them like roughhouse. I've seen them like make jokes at each other's expense, right? Do all the things like all the family things and all the sibling things because they are family, right? And that was the great tragedy of the fall, right? Is that it wasn't just like that Lucifer rebelled. It's that it was a family matter. It was a split in the family, right? And a third of the angels fell. You know, whenever we talk about spiritual warfare, I'm going to circle back around to different types of angels, I promise. But whenever we talk about spiritual warfare or the fall or war in the heavenlies, there is a great deal of sorrow and loss and grief attached to it because it was, you know, um, it's a constant pain, I think, to them that so many of their brothers and sisters fell
Yeah.
and turned away. And that's a heavy thing to grapple with. Yeah, it's one of the reasons why, like Lucifer can't really create anything. Satan can't really create anything. They can corrupt, right? They can corrupt and malform. And so a lot of the different forces of darkness you see, whether demonic or the fallen Elohim, the fallen lesser gods, or the fallen angels, and there are different power levels to each of those. Um, whatever they do, like the dark that you see is just the corrupted form of what the blessing and the light was supposed to be.
Yes.
And that ties back into Satan attacks us generationally, personally, across seasons in the place of our blessing. So the angels I've seen messenger angels. One of them is sort of dresses a little bit like Indiana Jones,
Nice.
and but with like a that bag like leather satchel or handbag or whatever, not handbag, whatever it is, and she gives
You're about to get slapped again.
no, I'm fine. It's fine. It's
I'm
fine. I don't
kidding.
even know where she is right now. But she looks dressed a lot like female Indiana Jones, right? I've met the like heavy duty sort of warrior angels that seem like um almost like they're melded with their armor
Hmm.
to a degree. The one that I'm thinking of, he has an Egyptian feel,
Hmm.
right? That he was very Egyptian and encountered and met the Egyptian gods. I think he was like around during the plagues. Um, and he's old. He's old and he's powerful, and he's a curious sort of fellow. I met several different, warrior and warfare angels. Two of them were sort of brothers that they go kind of hand in hand. They tend to go on assignment together and go hand in hand. Their sort of deal is that they're sort of angels of truth and justice because those are supposed to go hand in hand, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense.
Right. And the justice angel has a banner, you know, a heavy, heavy banner, and he's a brawny sort of angel because he's meant to carry that because justice, like actually carrying out justice in a way that silences and slates the sort of thirst for vengeance, the crying out of vengeance while um, extending mercy is a really heavy and a difficult thing.
Yeah.
And that has to go hand in hand with truth. Then that angel of truth is like, he's all like wings and swords and everything about him is sharp because truth is a piercing and unraveling thing. And he travels about on the wind because there's a lot of disinformation on the wind, right? The wind is sort of the realm of like disinformation and politics and communication and information and all that. One angel who sort of he leads the troop sort of the crew around me typically is he's another fighter, but he's an angel of hope, right? Because you're supposed to always have the hope of victory. And if you lose that, you've already lost. And he's needed encouragement from me from time to time, you know, which is not normally what you think about because normally you think about angels are sent to encourage and minister to you, right?
Yeah.
But
I've heard this a few times, I think from you and others, that the angelic, they don't get the same access to God we do.
mhm,
And so they get things from us, through our revelation of the Lord.
Yeah.
And so I'm pretty sure it was Micah that was talking about like even just if I remember right, he said something along the lines of praying in tongues
Yeah.
actually helps sustain the angels around us, I guess, or assigned to us or whatever it was. And that sometimes they get to see things about God because of what God reveals to
Yeah.
us through the Holy Spirit that
Yeah.
they didn't already get access to, which is kind of dope.
Well, and I think Paul says something to that. Either Paul or Peter, he says something like they say something to the effect of even angels long to look into these mysteries.
Hmm.
And so we have such right. We have such rights and access as sons and daughters of God, right? That not even the angels do. The verse was something like, "You have made man a little lower than the angels," and then later that changed, right? They went and
Hmm.
revisited that verse again and said, you know, from now we have been raised a little higher than the angels.
And it also makes sense that if you and I have two different revelations of the Lord and we can
Mm-hmm.
learn from each other, it makes sense
Yeah,
that if God is as vast as he truly is, that even the angels may not see the same things that we get to see. You know what I mean?
yeah,
We
and
all have different
it,
perspectives, and it makes sense that they would have a different perspective than us as well.
yeah, and it's they're they're old, right? Because spirit time and angel time, right? The years, what the years are, what a year is in the spirit and what a year is on earth, like not necessarily the same, right? And I'm not even sure quite how that all works,
Oh, you know, want a fun
but
one? I'll throw a fun one in here real
yeah,
quick.
just
Sorry.
go ahead.
You know how I think it's one like Peter, I believe, in either first or second Peter, I believe he said it's him that says a year of the Lord is like 1,000 years to us or
Some,
something, or
yeah, yeah, yeah,
a day to the Lord is like
yeah.
no, that's what it was. A day to the Lord is like 1,000 to 1,000 years to us.
That was a,
And if I'm correct, I believe he pulled that from the book of Jubilees
yeah,
because the book of Jubilees talks about the reason that Adam
hmm
didn't die the same quote unquote day, but he died the
yeah,
same day is because it says he died before he turned 1,000 because he was cursed to die in that day because a
yeah,
day to the Lord is as 1,000 years to us. And I was like,
yeah.
oh,
Well, that one makes sense.
yeah.
Yeah,
I again non-canonical. Can we lean on
yeah.
it? Not
Well,
necessarily, but it
is
does.
it is it interesting, and does it sort of point to the greater mystery of God, right? That there's more than we understand, and God's greater than we should understand, which should be a great cause of hope and joy. Yes, I think it does. I don't. Again, I don't know what to make of that non-canonical, right? But I remember you actually reminded me when you said that on encouraging angels that I had an encounter. It was like at 3 a.m. when I was working at this dusty old sawmill. I actually wrote it down, turned into a story. I can send you the link to that. You can do whatever,
Okay.
if you want. But
Maybe I'll put it in the show notes.
yeah, the stick picker angel is what I called it because I was at work picking up these like we have stickers, we had stickers to put in between like all the different boards and logs that we make, right? To keep them separate, whatever, standard sort of sawmill stuff. I was picking those up on the ground, and this angel came to me doing basically the same thing. And sort of what happened was this overlay bled into my senses where I knew I was there, right? Knew I was picking up and doing my job and whatever. But the sort of this tangible spiritual reality became so real to me. It was sort of this like forest that came creeping around me. And the angel Alara, I think she said her name was. She kind of looked like Little Red Riding Hood, but she also like kept switching ages and forms back between like
Hmm.
an old lady form and a younger form, but still in this like blue hood. And she was picking up this sticks out of the ground, out of this muddy ground, out of the thickets and the thistles and the thorns and the stones, and putting them in this basket. Basically, like she went on to sort of tell me how much like the process cost her to pick these sticks up, because like the thorns would cut open her palm and tear out her dress, The stones would wear away her fingers. She would get covered in mud and dirty. Beasts of the sky or beasts of the forest, would come and try and take them. And she said, like, these sticks, what I'm picking up, they're the treasures of the Lord.
Hmm.
And I knew when she meant that she was talking about people. That she
Hmm.
was an angel that um, was sent out to gather people because people are the Lord's foremost treasure. People are Jesus's foremost treasure. And she said, like, these are the Lord's treasures. He wears them like a wreath, in heaven. And that kind of paints a picture of, right, like the limbs grafted into the tree of life because
Yeah.
Jesus is the tree of life. He is the
Yeah.
source of life.
Also reminds me of the seeds on the path.
It's
Sometimes the
just
bees get
like,
it, and
yeah,
sometimes the
it
yeah.
was just like that. And so it sort of like played out. Like I saw this sort of vision of her like being harried and hassled and, robes torn and wounded and, sticks taken from her, until like she saw like one golden stick in the mud and raced to it and plucked it up and was so glad and so full of rejoicing for that one stick that she was able to pluck up. And that's the same sort of rejoicing that they have in heaven when we come to God, when a single believer comes to God, you
Hmm.
know? And we don't know the power of that. And that's what was so confusing to her and what made her so distraught and what was so convicting to me is like she said, sometimes like we need God too. And we can't come to him like you can. So when you cease to fight, when you cease to pray, when you cease to press in, it's not just that you lose out, it's that they lose out too, that we lose
Hmm.
out too, the angels. And they have to labor, twice as hard for half the effort. And they're waiting for the church, waiting for people to partner with them,
Hmm.
in prayer, in ministry, in the walk, they are edified too when we walk with God, when we're edified by the Holy Spirit, right? When we're doing the whole, being the church, being the living water, reaching out to people, helping to heal, to minister, to pray, to um, see to them, to serve, to do all the things, right? When we're walking this life out, it has an impact in the spirit. It has an impact on the angels. And they experience a great deal of grief and sorrow when we go silent,
Hmm.
when we abdicate our responsibilities, when we refuse to walk with God or refuse to press in or refuse to take hold of the gift and the call offered to us. So it was like that rent my soul.
Hmm.
that
Yeah.
was that was a heavy one and a hard one.
That makes
And
sense though. Like if we as born again believers have the Holy Spirit in us,
yeah,
if we squelch that, then it's like what Jesus says about covering up
yeah.
a candle.
You
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 don't
don't
cover
light
up
a
the candle.
candle to cover it, right?
But
You
if
can't hide a
we
city on a hill.
yeah, if we expose the world to the Holy Spirit by like letting him work through us, then it would make sense that because they may not be
Yeah.
directly in the throne room, but they're getting to have the bleed
Yeah.
over of literal God coming out of us into the
We carry the
prayer.
kingdom with us, right? We're
Yeah.
strangers and vagabonds in this world. That's the verse. Strangers and vagabonds and wanderers, and whatever translation of that word you want to use. We're foreign to this world, and we carry the kingdom and the oil and the anointing and the spirit with us when we accept Christ into
Hmm.
us, when we're filled with the spirit, when we're born again, all that. And so when we don't act, it's not just that we lose out, it's that they lose out and they have to labor so much harder for like, I don't think we realize the power of the grace on us
Yeah.
and the power of our prayers and the power of God working through us. And so I remember like being so uh teary, and trying to keep a lid on it because still at work, at 3 a.m. That was the backdrop. But I remember praying for her and it healed her, it restored her, right? Restored the tears in her dress and sort of like um, renewed her heart. And she, dashed off, I think. Laura, she told me her name. And then um, she's visited me as well before,
Mm.
like once or twice afterwards. I don't know. I think it does point to just the different ways, right, that the spiritual interacts with the physical. And also to the value of, like, I think particularly in that case, evangelism, right?
Hmm.
Reaching out to the lost and the hurt and the broken. And it shadowed, like, it shadowed the parallel, or paralleled the parable of the seeds.
Yeah.
Like I knew that as I was watching and listening, and I wrote it down, and I see and encounter a lot of this reality. And I know not everyone else does, but I do want to encourage people that it's real, that it matters, that your prayers, in the morning when you're praying for, you know, your kids or your church or your friends or whatever, the day ahead of you, like they really do matter.
Yeah.
Um, it's not just some rinky dink thing. It's powerful. And I think the lie that we've swallowed in the Western world is that, right, we're all children, grandchildren of the Enlightenment, um, of materialism, of consumerism, of this sort of like this world, we're the peak and pinnacle sort of thinking,
Mm.
you know?
Naturalistic.
Yeah. And it's had its day, it's running its course. People are looking for the spirit again because we are spirit. And so, as
Yeah.
we have bodies, but we're also spirit,
Yeah.
and that's interwoven with us. And so that's why people are looking to all these different other ways to have spiritual experiences and encounters. There are a lot of them, not all of them. Most of them, in fact, are probably not that healthy, or not that good for you. They're dangerous, right? And
Yep.
so if the church isn't willing to like step up and address this reality, someone else is going to,
Absolutely.
right? And that's how people get drawn into all sorts of different things.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
But we
why.
have to do that with nuance and care and responsibility and just a lot of adulting.
Yeah, it's messy. I mean,
So,
like
yeah,
when I was talking with Joe, I mean, she even said it straight up. She's like, "Yeah, the spirit is messy," and
it
that's one
is.
reason why a lot of cessationists stay away from it. They're like, "It's too messy. I don't like. How can I know that I know that I know that I'm on the right track if I am in a mess of things?" It's like, great. God has way more grace for
Yeah,
this stuff than we realize, and if we're truly training people well, and that's the thing too, is like biblically speaking, it is a biblical concept to have a school of the prophets, right?
yeah,
So if we're training people well, then the lead guy can't pull the whole like, well, I'm the
yeah,
prophet and God said and I'm gonna whatever, because
yeah.
even the Bible itself
You
train
should you should
like
train people up. You should raise people up. That's the best defense against,
precisely.
stuff like that, right?
Eh,
It's not necessarily in a very real, tangible way. You can't really bet on safety, but you can bet on making people stronger and wiser and clearer and clever. And that's energy intensive and that requires participation from the person. And so I think a lot of like are sort of like go to church, once a week, check out and do the service and whatever. Like that's not really working. That's not really the way it should be because
Yeah.
church should be a place, whether it's a Sunday morning or it's the gathering together of like believers. Church should be a place that you do life with, that you do fellowship with, that makes you better and wiser and stronger and
Yeah.
um, more compassionate, right?
Yeah,
All the different things.
and if the Bible actually tells people to test the spirits, then
Yeah,
and people are doing that, then you can't have that paradigm of I'm the prophet and everybody should fall
yeah.
underneath me and listen to what I say necessarily. And so there are redundancies written into the scriptures that should keep that from happening. And that's why we don't
Yeah.
have to be afraid of getting into the messiness because there is grace, there is mercy,
Well,
and there is a process. It's true that there is a process, but if we're unwilling to to put our feet in the proverbial waters of the spirit, then
Yeah.
we're going to lose a lot of people to this new ageism that's been happening for decades now and
Yeah.
is really prevalent right now. Like I know so many people personally that are like quote unquote spiritual and whatnot. And they're like, yeah, I'm having great spiritual experiences and I'm having whatever. But like, they don't realize or recognize that hey, you're dealing with demons. You know, people will be like,
Yeah.
yeah, I'll pull out a Ouija board and just play with it. And it's like, oh, this is just fun. Or I'll get out
Yeah.
my crystals and I'll get out my whatever. And I will seek this enlightenment, or I'll get out my weed or my mushrooms or my other
Yeah.
psychedelics, and I'll have this experience. You know, Joe Rogan talking about DMT and mushrooms and what's that called that they do down in the Amazon? Ayahuasca.
Ayahuasca. Yeah.
Yeah, like there's all these different things where people are like, yeah, I'm having spiritual experiences. Wow, I'm spiritual and I'm whatever. And I may not believe in that Jesus thing because Jesus restricts me and tells me to actually hold myself
Yeah.
accountable to something. But instead, I'm going to go seek this other thing that just feels good for a while, even though it's going to
Yeah.
bite you in the
I
tail
I
later.
hear you.
It costs something. It really does.
It
I'm
does.
even learning. I'm learning that a lot of even our technology came out of the psychedelic spiritual experience. There was a,
Well, that makes sense.
I don't remember the name of the project, but there was a legitimate project out of MIT that they took a bunch of geniuses and said, "Hey, we're going to have over the next several years, we're going to give you guys psychedelics, and so that you can be inspired to create things." And that's where the personal computer came from, the PC, laptop, and everything
Yeah.
like that. That's where a bunch of that technology comes from. That's where Jack Parsons got the idea for rocket technology.
Mm.
That's where a bunch of this stuff came out of, was either occultism or whatever. It's the same thing as the Genesis 6 paradigm, the Book of Enoch paradigm, where
Yeah.
angels taught people how to do things that we weren't ready for yet. Um,
Yeah.
and that's not to say that we shouldn't have ever got there, because
Yeah.
the Bible talks about in the Old Testament, the Spirit of God literally coming into only one person, and it was to teach him how to
Yeah.
create the adornments for the temple, if I remember correctly.
Oh no, I remember this guy. I don't Bezalel, I want to say. I don't remember.
Me neither.
I can't remember the exact name, but the craftsman that built he was a serious craftsman if I recall correctly, like multidisciplinary.
Yeah, but
But
he didn't know how to
yeah,
do that originally. The Lord taught him how, in the
yeah.
same way that the Watchers taught people how
Well, and
to create swords and
that
things.
shows again, right? Like God's creative, you know.
Yes,
So there's
yes.
a lot of room for creativity and nuance, and a lot of room for personality that I don't think we really realize, you know.
Hmm.
Um,
But all that to
yes,
say, people need to be willing to experience this stuff and put
yeah,
their feet in the waters when it comes to the church, because
it's
like I said, people are experiencing
yeah,
this stuff. You've got guys like Rogan telling people, yeah, do DMT, it's great or whatever. But you're dealing with demons and it will cost you something. It
yeah,
absolutely always
and
does, whether
it
it
might not
be
even cost like you in your lifetime, but be passed on to the generations that follow, right?
Masons. They're
That's kind
every
of their
single
thing.
time somebody gets into masonry, their children have demonic influence out the wazoo, whether
Yeah,
they like recognize that's what's happening or not.
and
Yeah.
I'm thinking of like one of my friends who I know who I'm not really going to go into her story, but she dabbled with witchcraft a little bit when she was younger. She got out of that. Like she had a sense like this is freaky, this is dark, you know. I don't want anything to do with that. But she is I don't know whether it's a coincidence or there's some cause and effect there, but she's one of the most like spirit attuned people I know.
Hmm.
And I think some of that was due to like doors being opened up, you know, right? Which is also all to say God can redeem, right? She believes God God intervened,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Redeemed that. And she's wildly spiritually gifted now. But it's I think that's the point I'd like to make is that it is a messy process, right? It's messy doing life, it's messy doing the church, it's messy wading into these waters, it's messy trying to learn and grow and discern and learn how to discern and what's the spirit, what's behind this, what's going on, what do I need, what do I even want, you know, who even am I? All these things are like messy, messy, messy. But God created a world that was messy, right? Like Adam was created from the dust of the earth, you know? And it's from him that we take like our form and our substance, right? He was clay breathed to life with spirit. I've met him
Okay.
actually.
Yeah.
That was a really wild experience. I was sitting in a cafe. This was one of those sort of like more in my spirit things where the sort of the physical world, what was going on there, sort of faded away a little bit. And I got to writing and I got to conversing, but I've encountered Adam. It was like, a great crowd of people had to make way, like he was at the back,
Yeah.
near the beginning, I guess. And, he came forward and spoke with me a little bit, just on some personal things. He said that God was making me into a better Adam, right? And that's kind of what Jesus was, right? We're being made in the image and the picture and the shape of Jesus.
Okay.
Because he was the second Adam. He was the better Adam.
Mm-hmm.
And so when he said that, he's like, he's making you a better Adam, right? A better me. That
Which
means
is what every father wants for his children.
yes. That's the other thing. That's the other thing he said is like, you're my son. You're one of my children, right? Because he was the father of Saul, Adam. And I remember like he had such a unique presence and such a unique sort of feel, I guess. I don't know how else to describe it. Very caring and full of affection, full of love. Like young, like in his prime, but like and full of that youth and that energy, right? He felt like so full of light, of sunlight, like clay or a riverbed that had absorbed sunlight for millennia, but also a sort of weathered and really old feeling about him, elderly, right? Like he had seen seasons and seasons and seasons. You meet those people, like typically older people that just have a sort of like calm or serenity about them because they've seen so many seasons of life come and go, and
Yeah.
they're grateful for it and they've learned lessons from it. So there was such a sense of settledness and peace around him. But he was still young. It was sort of like actually a little bit how like Aragon or not Aragon, Aragorn,
Yeah.
two different book series. Aragorn from Lord of the Rings was described, right? Like in the flower of his manhood, in the prime of his youth, but with the wisdom of the old,
Uh-huh.
kind of like that. And yeah, he talked to me about God making me a better Adam, which is sort of God's purpose for all of his children, right?
Yep.
And sort of, I think Adam's hope for all of his wayward children, he was very happy, right? He was joyful and affectionate, and just
Hmm.
full of love and gladness for all of his kids.
Yeah.
He taught to say, call me his son, basically, right? Like, because he's the father. Adam was the first of us. And then he also said something. He said, God loved me even after I failed, even after I fell. And if you get into the Genesis account, the language is closer that Adam was right there at Eve's side, right? He could have done something directly to intervene in with the serpent or against the serpent, but for whatever reason, he didn't. And then he he ate the fruit directly afterwards when he knew he shouldn't have because he couldn't picture living without Eve. And so the twofold there, but God still loved him afterwards.
Yeah.
And I think that should be encouragement to us that when we're going through the mess and making mistakes and being hurt and hurting others and all that, God still loves us in the middle of all that.
Yeah.
He loves us in the muck and the mire. He made us out of the muck and the mire. And so he can absolutely redeem and turn things around.
Yeah, dude, it's good. Man, we've preached like 3 sermons in here, and we have barely talked about what types of
Yeah,
things
I
you've
kind
actually
of had a
seen.
feeling this would happen. I sort of like had a sense through like the middle of the second sermon of the yeah.
No, it's good though. It's good. Yeah, I guess we we could keep going a little bit with some of the different types of things that you've seen, just to kind of
Yeah.
give a little bit more spread as far because I know you told me you've seen like serpent, like Leviathan type things. You've
Oh, yeah.
seen
You want to talk about that?
you even mentioned that you know of Lilith in the first episode we you and I talked.
Oh, geez. That's
You don't have to go into
that's a
the
lot.
details.
How far in are we?
Oh, I don't know. We're getting close to the hour and quarter mark, so
Okay, so I'll save that one for another day
yeah.
because that deserves more unpacking. But yeah, so I had quite a few actually encounters, quite a few enemy stuff and quite a few good stuff while I was in Reading. I met, huh?
I was gonna
Oh,
say, were most of the angels, here's a good question, were most of the angels like humanoid like?
um,
You said earlier
uh,
we were talking about a meme, you were like, I haven't seen the eyes of Lord of
yeah,
the Rings yet.
I haven't seen the burning wheels yet. Hoping, which is funny because I've seen the archangels. So that was, um, I've seen angels that were sort of more like animals. There's one like cat made of fire that keeps following me around
Hmm.
and tells me like, um I don't entirely know what that one's deal is, but kind of like uh he's sort of an angel. I think his what he's here for is like to help show me how to be more like enterprising and industrious or maybe apostolic. I don't fully know, but
Okay.
I've met and seen fire cats, Um, I've seen angels that were more animal. One of my angels, good angels sometimes have more than one form, right?
Okay.
Um, one of the angels I've met, his other form is a bird, like a finch or a sparrow sort of thing. And he said his name was, I think, Saren. And I looked that up, and that was the scientific name for like this old world of like these old world finches, right?
Hmm.
And his whole thing is when I was first introduced, when he first introduced himself to me, he called himself the All Challenger. Like that was his title, that was his job, that was sort of what he does and what he's about in his nature, right? And so he's like super brash and joyful and gun ho and ready to jump into anything. He has two swords in either hand, and his other form is this finch or this sparrow
Hmm.
because it goes back, right? God will take care of even the sparrows, right? He
Yeah.
takes care of the sparrows, so he'll take care of us who are much more important than the sparrows. So why are we worrying? You know? And so from that place is the place where like he drives all his faith to sort of jump into things.
Interesting. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's beautiful.
Um, let's see. I met the angel of I think Mount Shasta. And he was the size of a mountain.
Hmm.
That was I was driving to work again, another like almost 3 a.m. encounter. And way in the distance in front of me, but in that way where things in the distance you are so huge that you can still clearly see them.
Yeah, yeah.
And then you come closer or move one way or the other and you realize that they barely moved at all because they're that big, right?
Yep. Yep.
I saw him appear in like his outline sort of in lights. It switched over into my spirit, but I saw him like flicker in lights and I felt like a sharp like jolt in my chest, like, oh, that one was like, what? That surprised me because I was out of nowhere at like 2:45 in the morning.
Yeah.
But I think he's the angel of Shasta, and he's a very mountainous, rugged sort of angel. He was kneeling. Um, he was in charge, I think, of wrestling the principalities and powers of the sort of Shasta region.
Hmm.
Some of that might line up with Reading, overlap. I
Yeah.
think. I think. And so he was kneeling because he said that if he stood up at his fullest and fought at his fullest strength, other smaller angels would be crushed.
Hmm.
Other people and spirits and entities would be crushed and damaged in the battle. So he
Yep.
kneels, handicapped himself, but still wrestles with these things to create a shelter and an orchard and sort of like a space, a
Dude.
haven. Um, I
Okay,
think his
so
other form is a castle.
you
So
no, okay. That's interesting. So, I mean, that feels like a prophetic thing.
yeah,
Yeah. So, I guess let's talk a little bit about more of the evil or type stuff, and
yeah,
then maybe we can even talk about how you feel some spirits may be neutral, like you talked about a wolf
mm.
one time to me.
Yeah.
But
So
let's get to that last, maybe, because
yeah,
that's gonna screw with people's heads, I think, a little bit.
yeah, and there's not tons I can talk to there because like I'm kind of embroiled in this whole, good versus evil sort of thing, or God versus, you know. So the enemy, yeah. Uh
Those give
there's
people a taste, and then we'll do
yeah, okay.
a part two someday.
Real quick, yeah, there's the demonic, which is kind of bottom of the food chain, lowest in power, lowest in everything, kind of the lowest on the food chain in all of existence, actually.
Which is interesting because they were giants when they were living.
Yes, there's an irony there that I think is maybe like God directed or ordained. But lowest on the food chain are the demonic, right? A level above that, you get the fallen angel hymns, the gods, other things, and then you get like the fallen angels. I think were actually most dangerous
So
and
you
are
think
sort of
that
top of the hierarchy.
you think there's a difference between the Elohim and then other fallen angels?
So yeah, so I think like okay, so we have like three groups that fell, to the best of my knowledge and understanding, right? The original angels that fell with Satan.
Hmm.
None of them liked Satan because Satan was the architect of their fall. Um,
Makes
then
sense.
there's right, then there's the demons. No, wait, the fallen angels that fell with Satan. Then the Watchers that fell independently, I think, of Satan,
Okay.
and they birthed the demons. And the Watchers, I think, were chained in oblivion. They were chained in like Tartarus, like somewhere
Okay.
deep beneath the earth where the demons and the giants couldn't get them. The Nephilim couldn't touch them. And that's part of the anguish around the Nephilim and their rage is that they can't reach their parents.
Hmm.
Satan got a hold of the Nephilim, the demons,
Yes.
and inducted them into his army because he needed an army because, like, you know, the fallen angels didn't really like him. And even if they agreed to align themselves with him, it was still a third of the angels. So he's still outnumbered. That's the
Yeah.
other thing that the dark doesn't want you to know. They're losing quite badly.
Yes.
And then there were, I think, the fallen of the gods, the lesser gods, these entities in charge of the different systems
Yes, the
of the natural
Deuteronomy.
world and sort of like concepts too. Like Baal was the god of increase. That was one of his roles titles, and he went around and kept grabbing up other powers and titles and names and domains,
Yeah.
trying to rival God, and then God smacked him down with Elijah.
That's
So,
interesting. Yeah, I hadn't really thought this through too much. Like I always
mhm,
distinguished the Watchers and the ones that fell with Lucifer as maybe two different groups. But then
mhm,
I didn't even think about the fact that the Deuteronomy 32 and slash Psalm 82, the ones that God gave the nations to watch over and then fell
mhm.
themselves. I didn't ever never thought about them being a just a separate group
Yeah.
of
Well,
entities that fell.
and it's mysterious too, right? Because like we talk about like Leviathan fell, you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it's not clear to me that he was an angel in the typical way that we think about angels. He was some other sort of spirit, but he fell. He rebelled against God. I think
I
during
think
the fall of Lucifer.
I think the way that the Bible talks about Leviathan though is that he is Lucifer.
I
I feel like that's
disagree.
the
I think.
I think in Isaiah, if I remember correctly, it equates Leviathan to the old great serpent of old. I don't know. Again, this is all
Mm,
beyond, still a little bit
yeah,
beyond
it's
me,
a
but
little bit, well, and it's a little bit hard to tell, right? Because this stuff is messy. Like we said,
Yes. Yeah.
messy and mysterious, but also wonderful and good. So, me personally, right? Like, I've seen and encountered demons. They're sort of uh less tangible, wispier. They're not as powerful as they want you to think.
Yeah.
Um, More dangerous if like something actually they're not that intelligent, so there are more dangerous if something actually intelligent and actually powerful gets them under sway, or if they can make you afraid and believing their lies.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Then so their actual true forms are quite pitiful.
Hmm.
I remember this is the part where like if they actually get under the sway of something powerful, they can be a problem. I remember I was doing entirely too much intercession and spiritual warfare and declaration, decree, and like all that over a lot of people at once and over Reading, where I lived, you know. And so I spread myself too thin. I probably should have had other people there praying with me, you know, and I probably shouldn't have handled all those things at once. But I remember there was a string of like days, and I think January, where I was just getting walloped in spiritual warfare, you know, and oppression and attack by the enemy, you know, because there's always some sort of backlash, right?
Hmm.
The enemy doesn't want to give anything up. And so I remember there was one day where I kept like seeing flash visions in my spirit of like being surrounded by these jackals or hyenas, these bastard spirits, which literally are what the demons are, right? They're
Hmm.
bastards because they're not accepted, you know, by God. They're not accepted on the earth. That's not they're not allowed, you know.
Yes.
So I was surrounded by all these like jackals and hyenas that kept like whispering different lies to me. I knew they were lies, but they were given to me, right?
Yeah.
Because I was getting swarmed and feeling just terrible that entire day and trying to fight back, but eventually like just getting overwhelmed. Um, and out from the middle of them strode this like titan or juggernaut, this really huge, tall, muscular figure, sort of burnished skin with like glowing eyes and like a wicked sort of grin on its face, had a mace, you know, and he was like their ringleader. He was the titan, like the one in charge that got all these others in
Sounds like
there.
something out of Lord of the Rings for sure.
Yes, it does. And so like I'm not 100% sure. I think that was one of the fallen angels. Right. And I prayed about it later. And my sense later was that whatever the local powers were in the area, they had to allow something else to come in to try to deal with me because I was causing problems
Mm.
for them. And they don't like doing that. This is the thing. The enemy never likes, they don't like teaming up. They don't like allowing other powers into their territory, other dark powers, because, you know, they're all fighting for scraps.
Yeah.
They're in a very real way fighting to be the first of the on the bottom, you know, the first of the last in like a not godly way,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
right? Because they're fighting to be the best of the worst and the first to be thrown into the fire. Basically,
Yeah.
they're
Well, they're still attempting to catch God in a catch 22. They think that
yeah,
because the Lord truly is working through
yeah.
a form of legality, like he won't
He
go back on
doesn't
his word, so
he doesn't
they
go back on his word, and he doesn't like, you know, contradict himself or break his sort of
yeah. So
agreements or the systems or principles that he's made.
and
You
that's
know,
why sort of the original second fall with the Genesis 6 narrative there, that's why people believe that maybe they were trying to pollute the bloodline because they were like, hey, if we can pollute the bloodline, then the seed of
yeah,
the promised one that'll crush the head can never come, you know.
yeah,
So I think they still have this idea that maybe we can catch God in a catch
yeah,
22 at some point and then we can delay the
yeah,
inevitable, but
yeah. And then God said, "Hold my beer," and dealt with them.
yep.
That's
Oh,
Let's
that's a quote,
paraphrase.
dude. That's a
Yeah,
quote. If I
yeah.
ever started, like, whenever I make an intro to this whole thing,
You should make a shirt.
no, that's getting clipped.
Clipped. Yeah, there you go.
No,
Um,
yeah. So they're basically fighting to try to be the lead
they're
of
losing,
their whole nonsense. Yeah,
right? They lost when Jesus came, and so they're on a rampage because their time is short.
yeah,
And that's you can find that in scripture, right?
yep.
Um, and so it was several days of that, right? Of that sort of fighting, multiple different things actually, but that titan and those jackals, I remember being so like oppressed and attacked and foolishly not asking for prayer until like way too late. And I remember like I had to drive somewhere after work, drive to a tire place. And I remember like on the road there being like, it felt like my body was getting weaker. Like my body and my soul were fading, you know, like the colors going out of things, going gray. And really the tangible presence of like the enemy just so strong and thick and like I was struck and ringing like a bell,
Mm.
like my soul itself was struck, telling me 1,001 different things, like all these different words and curses and lies, like spoken to me and like seeping into my skin and into me,
Mm.
into my soul, like just die. I remember it being like icy cold. And there was like some voice inside of me at that peak that said, hold on through this, hold on just a little longer, and you'll be able to pray something about it,
Mm.
right? Something in my spirit. And so I just packed it all up, put it in a box, put it away, and drove, went about my business, did what I had to do. And I remember like it broke and I opened my mouth and out of me tumbled like I can't even remember the words, but some sort of prayer about you've lost and you're gonna fall.
Yeah.
Saying to the enemy, saying this to the enemy, right? You're gonna fall, and that fall is gonna be a calamity so intense that it's gonna make the fall look like a child falling off of the playground,
Mm.
you know? And that's, I think, a form of praise, right? We always say praise is telling our problems how big our God is.
Yeah.
You know, that's a form of praise, and that's a form of proclamation, and that's a form of prophetic decree because that's their fate and that's their future. And so I prayed in that vein. I was able to, right? Like it broke, and I got relief, and I think I fell asleep for like 10 hours afterwards when
Yeah.
I got home.
Spiritual stuff takes a toll on the body too.
Yeah, and that was a period of like that wiped me out for days, right? Like I was tired for like
Yeah.
still tired from that into like February or March, and I started getting more color back to me and life back to me. But it was such a tangible, like I felt like my body and my soul like fading,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
I felt my spirit fading within me because of the period of the attack. I did get a picture of what that battlefield looked like afterwards at the end, and like all the jackals and hyenas were slain, and the Titan was like on its knees or
Hmm.
laid out on its back or whatever, you know.
Yeah.
And so God wins. It's messy and it's painful and it's difficult and hell sometimes, but He wins, And that was it was multiple things in a row too, because I think several days before that, right, I had been praying for like the day before that I was praying about this like squid spirit. I didn't realize it was a squid spirit until Joe mentioned something, and I'm like, oh, that would have been helpful a few days ago.
Yeah.
But I was exhausted from battling that, and then a few days before that i I woke up with like Lilith naked in my bed, which was not the way anyone needs to wake up. I'll tell you that. That's not what
Nope.
anyone needs. And Lilith is like, I'm not entirely sure what she is, but um
Vampiric in nature for sure.
night demon. Yeah, well, she's a lot. That's, well, to, like I said, that deserves more unpacking. but Lilith and Baal, what I heard from God, what I got from God was that those two, Elohim, I think, were after me. Like they had teamed up to come after me. And so I had to pray through that and pray against that. Then I was praying against the squid thing and then the jackals and the titan, you know?
Yeah.
And so there's a variety of different things out there. You do have to walk with some care and at the leading of the spirit, you know, and not run ahead. That's what God said I had done. He's like, you weren't out of my will. You were trying to go too fast, you know,
Mm.
and run ahead. And so he told me to stop that. So I got like some discipline from God, which felt
You got to learn to
amazing.
Sabbath a bit.
Yeah, and it felt like relief, honestly, because it's relief when God chastens you. When God genuinely chastens you and disciplines you, it's a relief and it feels like peace and life and safety. It's not always pleasant in the moment, but it's like you can laugh at least later. You know, you're
Yeah.
like, yeah, God, that was dumb. That
Yeah.
was on me. But
Reminds me of
um
the book. I think it's On Hind's Feet or something like that.
yeah,
It's more of like a maybe like a children's story type book, but
yeah,
it we've been reading through it, and I'm just like, whoa, like this is so good of a picture of like, yeah, for
yeah.
this girl called Much Afraid to climb, who's lame and can barely walk and whatnot, for her to climb the mountain to get to the high places, she has to take, what is it, sorrow and I don't remember the other one exactly, but it's something along the line of like pain or something like that. But
Grief, maybe.
maybe, but the idea is that yeah, in order to ascend, in order to be, it's the same picture of like, in order to be forged into something
Hmm.
useful, you have to go through the fire and the hammer and the pounding, and in order for
It's just the
the
climb, right?
yeah, and the or the diamond to be
Yeah,
fixed, it has to be under pressure and then chiseled away or whatever, or however they do it. You know what I'm saying? But
yeah,
it's that whole picture of that's why the Lord allows us to go through some of these things.
yeah.
And then to learn the lesson of like, okay, God, I need you to fight for me and me
Yeah.
not just try to do it in my own strength because I can't.
Well, yeah. And now it's a testimony, right? Now it's an experience. Now it's like another thing I can point to and say, like, the battle gets really hard. The dark is stronger than some people want to think. It can do genuine damage. There is loss, and God still wins, and He
Yeah.
still redeems, and He still comes out on top and doesn't let me fall or fail. You know,
Yeah.
um, even though it was exhausting and painful, it wiped out my angels too. They were tired as they were tired from that one.
Yeah.
Um, and I've had all sorts of encounters, right, like that.
Yeah.
Like we could go on and on
Oh
and
yeah.
on, but
We could. No, it's beautiful, man. Because like we said, I think in the last one, this all speaks to it speaks to the just the bigness and the vastness of how the Lord really is. It speaks to the reality that the Spirit is way more interesting and intricate
yeah,
and involved in our lives than Western Christianity tends to believe.
yeah,
There's some groups like the Bethels and the House of Prayer groups and those that have a bit of a paradigm for this, but
but yeah,
I think the church needs to grasp this stuff a little bit more because
yeah,
while I am fully for and I fully believe that biblical literacy needs to climb as well. I'm not saying that we should lean so heavy into spiritual matters that we forget the biblical truths and
yeah,
the whatever, but at the same
in
time, we need
spirit and
both.
in truth. Yeah,
Exactly. That's what I've got John 20, 4:23 tattooed on my hand here. It's the worshipers
yeah. I
will
think Krakos is fine with that tattoo.
oh yeah. The worshipers will worship in spirit and in truth. It has to be both.
Yeah,
And that's what I think the church has a tendency to do a poor job of. Not all the time, but like it's either super spirit heavy and forget the word or super word heavy and forget the spirit.
yeah.
And we need that
It
mixture.
requires nuance and the sort of grace and the courage to embrace the mess and trust it to God. And that's a picture, I think, of hope and faith, you know, because
And
they run together.
Yeah, and the realization that our English transition isn't going to get everything right.
Yeah.
We have to go back to the original languages sometimes.
Yeah.
But regardless, no, dude, this is
Anyway,
good, man. This is good. Yeah.
yeah,
You've encouraged people, I think, by this point to
I
remember
hope
that
so.
like the Lord is the point of all this. Like even unto this, like, yeah, it's cool, angels and yeah, like seeing
Yeah.
different things and experiencing different things. It's all dope, but it really all is unto the Lord because
Yeah.
if you take these illegal back doors, like the Lord talks about, um, those that get into the shepherd pen, not through the gate, but like by climbing over the fence or
Yeah.
whatever, and they are forced out. If
Yeah.
you're entering the spirit through any other way, it is an illegal entry. And not only do you give the enemy legal right to jack with you,
Yeah.
but you also will be kicked out
Yeah.
if the Lord finds you there, or whatever. I mean, however you want to say it. But yeah, it's a wild thing to ponder, and for me, it creates more beauty
Yeah.
to the whole gospel story. It shows so much more of what Jesus was doing beyond just what we think he was doing,
Yeah.
and
No, we can. I already have a bunch of things I want to say, or just on that. So we'll have
yeah,
to do another, like a part 2 or 3 or whatever we're at now. Or maybe if we count all the times I've been on, but no, 3 this time, 4 next time. We'll have to
yeah.
do a part
Either way,
4. But yeah, man.
love it. Love it. Awesome. Well, guys, if you enjoy the episode, seriously, 5-star on your favorite platform. That helps a ton. You can share this with your friends if you find it encouraging. I'm not out for success on this, but I'm going to keep doing it. And if you like it, you might as well show your friends. So thanks for listening to the Fringe Faith podcast, and enjoy your weekend, or whatever. Love you guys. God bless.